You hear me, Jeremy? Good? Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. We're going to get the work session started. It is 4:31. At this time, I will take an adoption of the agenda.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? If not, please raise your hand and say aye. 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 All opposed? All right, we're going to move on to the agenda items. First item, 2.01, remaining bond allocation project update, and that presentation is going to be given by Dr. Miller, along with Mr. Holder, if needed.
Good afternoon. Yes, as the presentation indicates, we're going to talk through the LSR7 Comprehensive Facility Master Plan. And really the purpose today is really kind of threefold. It's really to talk through where we are in the 2020 project updates, go through financial impact, and really kind of dig into what our capital projects looks like over a 3-4 year period. Give you a sense of what future planning will look like, and then open it up for some discussion. So again, just reviewing some of our project updates. And again, this is really, Kyle Grell and the construction managers have done a great job of really describing the work that's been happening. Really, this is going to focus more on the finances. So we know that we were really fortunate with Lee Summit High School, East Trails, and Mason, and really due to the early bids, we were able to really financially have favorable bids due to market conditions at that time. We know that Eastern Trails Middle School, some of the public improvements, we've discussed that in several board meetings when we went out to bid. We saw the price escalation in our GMPs. That's really kind of impacted our overall project budget. We know at one point we were projecting our middle school projects to be about $5 million at the onset, but with those final GMPs, that number really kind of decreased to about 1.3 million. Middle school renovations, again, market conditions changed, right? So we saw that escalation of construction costs. Safety and security, when we actually put that out to the public, we had that $3 million, and we knew more work would likely need to happen, and so what we want to do is plan for that, knowing that we have premium bonds. And then early education, with the purchase and renovation of Paradise Park, again, looking at the timing of when we're going out to bid on projects, there's going to be an escalation of costs. So we want to give you, we have some new numbers. We've been working with architects, so we want to provide those to you today. So as we walk through, kind of line by line, through the projects, just want to give you a scope of where we think we are. Again, projects aren't complete. This will be a work in progress, and we will continue to update the board as we go along. So athletics, we originally budgeted $14.5 million. We know that this project is $1.75 million under budget, so that proposed revision would take that down to $12.75. Lee Summit High School renovation, we feel like that $80 million, we're still on track. We have a healthy contingency in place. We know this is a big 3-year project. So again, we're hopeful that there will be contingency that comes back to the district, but again, with market conditions and unexpected issues that can come up with construction, we're going to say it's on track at this time. East Trails Middle School and Lee Summit High School baseball complex. So again, that budget is $500,000. The budget status, we know that's $1.3 million under budget. So there's a proposed revision. Middle school renovations, as I mentioned previously, that original estimate or that original budget was $25 million. Again, when we took the projects out to bid, we know that $2.6 million additional is needed. Mason Elementary renovation, the original budget is $16 million. We feel like we have a pretty strong contingency, and we feel like that will come back at $300,000 being under budget. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, safety and security. Again, I feel like at this point, 3 million additional is needed, and you'll see that reflected in the proposed revisions. Early Education Center, that original budget was 9 million. Again, the budget status, we feel like an additional 4.5 million is needed. So that proposed revised budget would go from 9 million to 13.5 million. So the total, again, so our original budget was 224 million. We believe we need an additional 6.75 million from premium bonds to complete the work that's already begun. So the proposed revision is 230,750,000. So in the June work session, we had some good preliminary discussion, really started to brainstorm different options on how we can best utilize premium bonds. When we talked about 3 different options, the CAC, if you recall, developed a healthy list of projects to forecast for us in the future. So we could take on larger projects, we could focus on known existing capital projects, or we could develop a blended approach between both larger and smaller projects. So that's one of the things we've done over the last couple of months, especially with more known conditions with the financial, the economy at this time. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan Holder, and he's going to walk you through where we are in regards to the capital projects.
So the first slide that we have here is primarily focused on revenue for Fund 4. Capital projects are ongoing in every school district. Each year, whether it be HVAC, roofs, paving, there's just a myriad of expenditures that are needed in a district on a yearly basis, and particularly in a district of this size. Looking at our revenue projections in FY22, you can see what is projected, and that's this school year, 2021-22. We're hoping to make a transfer of $3 million from the general fund to the capital projects fund. The Fund 4 capital projects, that is primarily our merchants and manufacturing revenue source. We place a significant amount of that revenue source into Fund 4, and so we plan to continue that this year. And there are a couple other small items that can come in through Fund 4 that would also go into that Fund 4 capital projects line. And then the local property tax line, as you recall, we place 5 cents into our capital projects levy. Every penny generates approximately $250,000, and so you can see how that equates. Currently in this fiscal year, $1.25 million. The projection then goes across from this fiscal year, looking out for the next 4 years, and you can see that in FY23, 24, and 25, we have $4 million of current bond funds that we could add into the capital projects revenue source. You will also notice that in FY23 and 24, in the general to capital fund transfer, that increases from $3 million to $6.5 million in both FY23 and 24. The reason for that is that with our ESSER3 funds, we would like to use $7 million approximately out of the $10.3 million to help with HVAC projects across the district. A reminder with those ESSER funds, they are one-time funds, and so as much as we can use those for one-time expenditures, we feel like that's a good use of those funds, and they're not into recurring expenses that we won't have a revenue source for in future years. So that is why you see with the total budgeted resources, that goes up rather significantly with the added bond funds as well as those ESSER3 funds in 23 and 24. And then in 25, it comes back down We still have the bond funds, but we would not have the ESSER3 funds available. So expenditures. And keep in mind, this is a broad picture of all the items, and you look at all of the things that can fall into capital project Fund 4 expenses. There's a wide variety of items that fall into this category. But most importantly, if you look down at the bottom, you will notice that the total expenditure line is listed in green, and then you see the variance with the budgeted resources on the last page. At the end of this year, if we make a $3 million transfer, you'll notice that we drop just under $1 million. So currently our Fund 4 balance starts at $10.2 million approximately this school year. So we drop down to $9,266,000. But then in FY23 and FY24, you will notice that $3 million in FY23, $3 million in FY24, and then in FY25, it levels out a little bit, but with these projections, we would end up at just over $2.6 million in Fund 4. All right? So in summary, these projections, I think on the revenue side, it is safe to say these are conservative. On the expenditure side, I don't know that they are very conservative. I think that these are expenditures that will need to be made by our school district over the next 4 years. Capital project maintenance is one of those items that when it's deferred, it just builds on itself each year. I did not mention previously, and I should have, the last 2 fiscal years we have not made a transfer from Fund 1 to Fund 4. And so our capital projects balance has dropped from just over $18 million down to the $10.2 million level to start this fiscal year. As you can see, over the next 4 years, our Fund 4 balances will decrease, even with the infusion of the ESSER3 money that we're using for HVAC projects, as well as if the $4 million in bond money for the next 3 fiscal years is utilized. So what can we do to fix it, ultimately, or to address this? There are several strategies, and the first is that we could consider making a larger transfer from Fund 1 to Fund 4. On the second bullet point there, you'll see that in Lee's Summit, each year you have a calculation that gives you a dollar amount that you can transfer from Fund 1 to Fund 4. For our district, when you look at what's commonly referred to as the 7% transfer and the transportation amount, that equals almost $10.2 million. So when you see the $3 million that we had projected on the previous slide, in essence, we're using $3 million of that potential $10.2 million to make the transfer. Another way that is not in a bullet point, but in a levy situation, we currently levy 5 cents. If you levy 5 more cents, that's $1.25 million more, because each penny is about $250,000. In a way, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another, because you're taking money from Fund 1 and you're moving it to Fund 4. But you can levy more in Fund 4, but that means you would have to levy less in Fund 1 in order to do that. The third point there, portions of future bond issues. We could definitely consider utilizing some of those capital resources, increasing the amount from $4 million to address some of the deferred maintenance and the new maintenance that we know is going to be needed over the next several years. And then the last item there, in our CSIP action plan 4.1, it does reference, the consideration of a ballot measure. As we know, our Prop C rollback was 0.1272 cents, so almost 13 cents, and that equates to about $3.2 million this year. If you look at the variance in revenues, and again, you see that trend. This year, it would only go down about $1 million, but then you see the $3 million in '23, $3 million in '24, and then it levels out. Looking at the expenses there, I would mention, and I have a lease purchase payments section at the bottom. Within the transportation section in particular, that is typically for a bus purchase, which is generally a lease period, and the majority of payments from Fund 4 come from that transportation line. And so that is why that is a significant amount.
So, thank you, Nathan, for walking us through that. And really, the last piece that we want to share with you, it's really a comprehensive facility master plan. Really tried to think through what would be a more digestible format that we could continue to update and monitor as we move through the years. So again, June 2020, that election, we wanted to start by providing what that enrollment was. And again, that account was provided by Applied Economics. Really provided our assessed valuation and our bonding capacity. And that was after the 2020 issue, so just for your awareness. We take a look at our resources, $224 million. And then when you consider interest, premium, and bonds, that's an additional $36 million. $36,500,000. So total resources, $260,500,000. So now as we go through and we take a look at the expenses associated with what we just discussed, and making the changes that we laid out previously, amended the renovation for Mason Elementary, updated the new Paradise Park renovation fee to $13.5 million, changed the middle school amounts as well, and again left high school at $80 million. District stadium improvements, again, we decreased. We increased the safety and security to $6 million. And if you notice on line 35, we also added property, which is about $3 million, so to allow us to go and investigate and potentially purchase land for high school number 4 and elementary number 19. So in June, we also talked about other key projects, and I think we've done a nice job of trying to narrow that down through discussions. We feel like Miller Park really needs some attention. We know that we have we've had long-term students in mobiles, and that's not a good plan. We need to move them into a more permanent facility. So in visiting with Hollis and Miller, they've prepared an estimate of approximately $5 million. Jeremy Bonison and Dr. Buck have been working with the city regarding expansion in an aerospace program. So we put an estimate of $2.5 million. And we also believe that robotics and construction geometry should be a priority. And we put an estimate of $6.5 million. And I want to just mention that there's the potential for alternate resources, grant funding for a couple of these projects. So we're investigating that. So again, these are estimates. I just want to continue to state that. Capital improvements, we feel like $12 million, again, if we can allocate to capital improvements. And again, part of our work with the city is the Blue Parkway realignment. We escalated the cost. If you recall, it was originally $750,000, but with prices increasing, we felt $1 million would probably be safer. And that brings that total expenses to $260,500,000, which really matches the total resources. Now, this document, again, does a little bit of future planning. And again, kind of forecasts and puts in a placeholder. Always open for discussion, but really trying to forecast when the next bond issue would be. So on this particular document, we're saying April 2025. And again, we've provided Applied Economics projection based on the 2020 information they gave us. The increased projected AV, and we used a 3% increase, and we really feel like that's probably very conservative. And so we know that has a pretty significant impact. Based upon a 3% increase, Stiefel put our bonding capacity projection at $214 million. Again, if that 3% goes up, so does that number significantly. So what we flagged for big projects potentially, right? More discussion to come. And again, these are carryover projects from the last CAC discussion. Is potentially a $115 million no tax rate increase bond issue. $40 million for continued elementary renovations, $30 million for expansion of Summit Tech, MIC, and looking at renovation work at Lee Summit North. That would be the next big high school. It doesn't need quite the work that Lee Summit High needed, but at least really pay some attention to Lee Summit North. And again, allow for some land purchase potentially for middle school number 5. Again, I think we want to continue to be looking down the road. The next placeholder that we have is 3 years from that, and that would be April 2028. And we see applied economics projection increases our student enrollment to 18,873. Again, using that 3% increase in AV, we're over $3 billion in assessed valuation. Again, another conservative number. And the Stiefel bonding capacity, if we were to do $115 million in 2025, we would still have $211 million. And again, right, so core projects potentially for 2028 would be elementary 19 and potentially high school number 4. I know we've had a lot of questions about when high school number 4 would be considered. If you take a look at applied economics enrollment projections, that 2030 marker is when we get beyond the 2,000 per student high school capacity. So we'd want to be a couple of years prior to that to really consider it. A lot of things we know can impact enrollment, online enrollment. How we choose to look at high school could be very different. So really pulling together some instructional teams to evaluate that need. Do we need a traditional comprehensive high school or do we need something different? So again, this is just forecasting work. This is the opportunity for us to put placeholders in and really kind of bring this back to you on a more regular, updated basis. So with that, that's the conclusion of our presentation. Happy to answer any questions for you.
Okay, at this time we will take some questions. So thank you very much for the presentation. We had multiple things light up here, and so we'll start with Board Member Campbell.
Thank you. Dr. Miller, can we get a copy of the slides? And thank you for the overview of the, oh, okay. Oh, great. Okay, great. Thank you.
You have 5.
And then
go refresh.
just staying in the 2020 column, the Paradise Park, is that a projection or is that the updated number that we've looked at with the architects?
So that's the updated number that we've looked at with the architects. Again, that number will continue to be refined, but yes, so we've done space utilization, had a number of meetings with them.
So in the detailed bond budget information that we get, are we going to go ahead and update that number in there?
We probably won't do that until January, once we sell the next bonds, right? And that income comes in. So likely that report will get updated in January.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Board Member Fritchie.
Yes, request for those documents was one of my questions, but my other question, Dr. Miller, is the $7 million of ESSER funds to help with HVAC projects. Now, my understanding is that ESSER funds can only be spent on specific things. So HVAC, I know that's one of the things we talked about when we talked about COVID mitigation strategies and things like that. So is that one of the reasons why we can use the funds in that way?
So in ESSER 3, there's really a 20% of that really has to be addressed to instructional need and instructional deficits, and then the district has some discretion. We feel like applying it to HVAC stays within the spirit in which we received the money, right? It was really due to COVID-related concerns, and we feel like updating HVAC or mechanical stays within the spirit for which we received those funds.
So that will help us also probably improve our air quality in our buildings?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you.
Back to Board Member Campbell.
I just had one more comment. I just really appreciate the long-term view that you guys have taken here, because this lays out groundwork, even though, to your point, it's estimates, but it begins all of us thinking as a community, what do the next years look like down the road? So thank you so much for putting that all together. And Dr. Buck, I had thought I might ask this a little bit later in the meeting tonight, but I think it might be a good time to think about, so, thinking about how with the CFMP, and we began the discussions with our community about redistricting, boundary shifts that have occurred, that have been implemented, and then now we're looking at the boundary shifts around the middle school 4 and 6th grade coming into middle school. It feels like there should be a cadence of when we're looking at boundary changes, and that changes, I feel like, a little bit of our message as we talk with community members, with each other, about what that looks like in a growing district. So if you buy a house and you have a 2-year-old in the Lee Summit High School area, thinking about when that child is going to go to high school, understanding that in a growing district, those boundary changes may change a few times in those years. So is there a number of years that we're thinking about, that we talk about looking at redistricting? Is it every 5 years we take a hard look at that? Is it every 2 years? I don't know what that cadence looks like, but it feels like that falls in line with what you're doing here, Dr. Miller, as well.
So I'll start off and Dr. Miller can fill in. There's two kind of ways you look at this. So one, when you open a building, it automatically causes a boundary shift. So that's what we're having happening later tonight, right? Another way is when you outgrow your current facilities, but you're not opening a new building. That's what happened to the previous boundary. So we do review our enrollment with the board annually, but I think we can definitely put in something on a regular basis, whether it's every 3 or 5 years. And I think maybe we want to engage Rick Bramer to talk about when that would be, to add in with that a look at how are we doing with our current facilities. That doesn't necessarily mean we need to do a boundary change, but just a boundary check. But then again, when we have opening of a building, because what's unknown about us in this next decade or two is the PRI land and how fast that opens up or how slow that opens up. Right now, our applied economics believes we're going to be good till 2030 in our current facilities with this new middle school opening up. But that could change, if building starts happening fast. So that's definitely an annual check on enrollment pieces. But Dr. Miller, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's a great response. And I will say, prior to any bond work happening, part of our planning process is to pull a team together, right? Pull a CFMP team together. And really, that's really where the nexus of confirming these are the projects that we want to do, what are the impacts, and that's really starts to help signal to the community as we start to report back to the board.
Mm-hmm. I just think, thank you, because I just feel like if we become a changed community, a community that understands that cadence of when we're going to look at redistricting, that helps move the needle for people's understanding of planning for their families, even people that don't have kids and that might have kids in the future, thinking about change is just a part of our DNA here because we are a growing community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member Hedrick.
I have several, so I'm just going to ask one at a time, if that's okay.
Okay.
The first one would be on your slide where you have the current bond projects and the original budget and the budget status. Would you be able to address on safety and security the reason why that budget needs to be doubled? And in terms of, is that a matter of scope changes or something else?
All right, and I might invite Kyle up to really kind of talk through some of the additions. We knew that when we put the 3 million in, there was a potential for that number to be low. Again, really looking at fob access, secure access across the district, and creating a standard for security cameras. So I'm going to turn it over to Kyle, and he can elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, thank you. There really are two reasons why that budget change is needed. And about half of that budget change was just something that we knew from the very beginning. And the numbers, when we were just slotting budgets into projects at the time of the bond development, we just knew that was something we were going to have to accomplish with the premium bond resources at the time. The rest of it is purely from some assumptions that were made, and I will take some responsibility because I had made the assumption that they were including all the new construction projects. They made the assumption that the new construction projects budgets were going to pay for the safety and security at those buildings. So we didn't find that out until very late, and so those funds, one place or another, the security either needs to be paid for by the project or out of the security budget. So we've just left those in the security side.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So then my next question is on this sheet that you handed us.
Yes.
In terms of the other projects that are listed, the Miller Park, aerospace, et cetera, do we have an anticipated timeline for those projects, or have they been prioritized in any way?
So we are still working on timeline for all of that. Miller Park, we know that's been a historical need. We feel like we really need to move forward on that. Again, there's quite a bit of discussion and planning happening around those other two core projects. I will tell you, geometry and construction is scheduled regardless as a class in 2 years. So us having a facility, we feel like would be wise to do that. We know that there's been the historic request to have robotics at each of the 3 high school campuses. We feel like that would address that need. It would also expand the opportunity for access for students to participate in that program. But no, those are still conversations, and as soon as we have timelines, we can provide that to you.
Well, I think that'd be helpful, especially in terms of trying to identify the amount of the capital resources that we could push towards the capital projects fund. So, okay, my next question in terms of the property for Elementary 19, how is the current property that we have, is that no longer needed because of the location of that, or could you address that?
Sure, and that's a great question. And so the property to the northeast, close to Mason.
Right.
We're continuing to monitor that. We feel like the need is going to be more urgent in the southwest. So we feel like between balancing enrollment at Mason, the work that's happened at Mason, that will allow us to not utilize the property in the northeast for some time.
Okay, and then my last question is in regard to on the capital projects expenditure projections. Some of the expenditure areas from one year to the next, there's some significant increase in the dollar values. And I think it would be helpful for not only the board, but for our community to understand what some of the rationale is for some of those increases. And that really goes to the question I had earlier about the increases in the bond budgets also, particularly the ones for safety, security, and the early childhood, early education center. I know from our conversations here, you've explained the rationale, but I think it would be helpful for these documents for our community members to have that information as well.
Okay, all right.
And I think that's.
Board Member Hedrick, is just posting this document as public documents, is that sufficient? Is that what you're thinking, or are you thinking?
Well, like for example, we could even, on the increases from year to year on the capital projects, for example, one might be on the roofing, where we go from 150,000 to 3.7 million. Or in technology, where we go from 1.65 to 5.65. I just
Providing
think
more detail.
Providing some details and rationale for that would be helpful
Okay.
for the board, or maybe just for me, I don't know, but also for our community, I think would be helpful information as well.
We could do that at a future date if you
Okay,
think that would be helpful.
sounds good, thank you.
Any other questions regarding the presentation? Board Member Campbell, sorry. Man.
That's all right. Kathy's fine. It's all good. My question is more for Judy. I just wanted to make sure I was tracking with your questions, Judy, because I really appreciate them. Are you speaking to slide 8 and 9 when you're asking for them to blow out a little bit more about the capital?
Particularly 9.
Okay, I thought so, but thank you.
Any other questions regarding the presentation tonight? Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate it. We'll move on to item 2.02, which is going to be the equity policy discussion. And we will bring up Shelley Sanders, who will lead us off in that one.
Oh, thank you very much, Board President Murdoch. I'm so excited to be here today to talk about the Equity Board policy, which is titled Policy ACIB. Just to give a little background or history regarding the policy, the LSR7 equity plan was adopted in 2019. Goal 1 of the equity plan is governance and leadership, and outcome 2 says develop an equity policy that aligns with school and district practices to reflect expectations for diversity, inclusion, and equity. And the timeline that was set forth in 2019 was fall 2021, and here we are in fall 2021. So we're so excited to bring this forth to the board today to have conversation around the policy and where we go forward. So I look forward to questions regarding the policy draft.
This time, is there anything else you wanted to add, or do you just want to open the floor to any discussion and questions?
If you would like, I can share the process, or we can open the board. I did share the process of that we took to create the board policy and then get feedback in the information along with it, so we can open it up.
And more than anything, I just wanted people, even in the public, to know that the draft was sent even to a lot of different people, including the board, who could provide
Yes.
initial
Do you want me to
feedback.
go ahead and talk through that process?
It
I can.
it might be
absolutely.
just a brief summary so that people kind of know that it's gone through a couple of iterations here before
absolutely.
it's come before us tonight.
So the team came together last spring and started looking at beliefs and commitments. Those beliefs and commitments were drafted and brought to the board in June of 21 at the board retreat for review. At that time, the board gave a thumbs up to go ahead and proceed with writing a draft equity board policy. That same group was charged with that work. So we met on July 21st and reviewed several mentor board policies, equity policies from around the country and our local metro area, and then worked to draft a policy. The first round of feedback went to the Board of Education once the draft was created. The second round of feedback went to community. We were able to gather some members from some community groups to come together and provide feedback. It was an amazing opportunity to hear from several members of our community just for their hopes and dreams for all LSR7 students. We then had the opportunity to pull together district staff, and we had food and nutrition service workers, transportation, teachers, administrators, district administrators. So we had a variety of voices in the room to share feedback. We were able then to take all of that feedback along with SLT's feedback to the same group for a revision session. And so what you see, so after that revision session, it then goes off to MSBA, and then they provide their feedback. And so what you see in front of you is the work of that group with all the layers of feedback that were provided throughout the process. And I'm sure we're headed into another potential revision state, which is A-OK.
I don't know about that. You never know. You never know.
We're open for it.
That's right.
Hey, we want to get it right.
Are there questions, comments that people would like to make to kind of lead this off here on the policy? Board Member Fritchie.
Okay, yes, I actually have about 4 questions that I have after just going through, and some of this is for the public's information too. Just so
Absolutely.
they know, kind of what information we got, what kind of feedback we got, and that kind of thing. So the first thing, though, is I know all of our policies have to be vetted through legal, and so has Mr. Hatley had a chance to go through and?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And then I would kind of like to know, you said in the verbiage of this that there were some prominent themes that came back from the feedback from the groups. What were some of those themes that came back from the groups?
So there was this strong desire to ensure that all groups were represented in this policy, that this policy expanded the true umbrella of equity, and it was inclusive of all of those groups. And so in the policy, you'll see sexual orientation, you'll see race, you'll see socioeconomic status. It was the desire that all groups be represented in the policy. There was another strong desire to really make this about students and families. And so initially, it started off reading very much like a formal board policy, and we got the feedback that sounded like it was for us and not for kids, for students. So we really went back and looked at the tone of that start and making sure that it was about students and not about the adults. And so that was a big revision that was made. The last theme of feedback we received was regarding this idea of not tolerating this behavior or not tolerating behavior. So really taking a strong stance from the board's perspective that in LSR7, we all belong in this space. And if anyone is treated as if they are not, it will not be tolerated. We will move forward. So we really then looked at policy AC, which is our discrimination and harassment policy, to look at some of the verbiage in there and try to align that with some of the verbiage in policy AC.
Very good. And I do want to say that I really appreciate the policy actually including some definitions, because I think oftentimes when people hear terms, they don't understand. It may mean something to one group or a person as opposed to another. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to define those terms.
I'm glad you said that, because that was another point of feedback we got. I think initially in the first draft, there was one definition, and we got back, there needs to be definitions. And so then what we said, what do you want defined? Because there's so much that you can define in a policy like that. So that was a theme that came up too. So I appreciate you pointing that out.
Okay, here's another question for you. I appreciate that you listed the different groups that you got feedback from, and I was just wondering, was there any difference between the feedback you got from the community group versus the feedback you got from the more school or district-oriented group?
I would say they were pretty much aligned with the groups. I would say the district groups probably challenged a little bit more to make sure that it was inclusive of all groups, but there was this strong desire that it not be a racial equity policy, but that it be an inclusive equity policy that looked at all groups. So,
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Board Member Campbell.
I love the progress. I'm so excited about the work that you've done and that you've engaged people on. I think our progress on this is just leaps and bounds. So kudos and thank you.
I can't take the credit, but I appreciate it. I will pass that sentiment on to those that did the heavy lifting.
Appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. I do wonder, and I'm so glad that we've gotten good involvement. My first question is, if people are reviewing this online, what would there be, what path would they use to provide feedback as well? What would be kind of the mechanism?
I think right now the mechanism we have in place is to contact us. And so if our community would like to provide feedback on the policy that is posted right now, we would love to have that sent to us through the contact us, and Ms. Ismer will direct that my way. I think we got a few tidbits of feedback earlier today about the policy, so we will consider all of those and probably bring a team together again.
Awesome. And I know you and I have kind of discussed the student voice and where we can weave that in here. So are we thinking about how to engage our students around this policy creation and not just policy creation, but then how that kind of feeds into handbooks and boots on the ground and buildings and, yeah.
So what we know about policy, it's great to have, but it is merely words on a piece of paper until action is put behind them. And that is really where we want to empower the student voice, is what does this look like in your space? And so Dr. Buck currently has a student superintendent's advisory committee, and we are hoping, once this is approved at this level, to take it to them and to get them to start to paint a picture for us about what that looks like. We will, Dr. Carlson will also work to take it back to the handbook committee so that we can see where does this live in our student handbooks. There are several policies that are outlined and noted in our student handbooks, and so we'll have that conversation about where this policy would live in that space. So absolutely want to engage students on painting us a picture of how this policy can impact their day-to-day lives in their buildings.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Board Member Allen?
Thank you, President Murdoch, Ms. Sanders. I looked at this list of folks who've been engaged to put this together, and what a good broad cross-section of personalities and experiences. I mean, parents to community members. So obviously there's a lot of work that's been done. I'm probably picking apart little pieces of this that may or may not be fair, but I'm going to throw this out here anyway because I even beat myself up a little bit saying, my goodness, this is the 11th hour, so I probably should have emailed this ahead of time, but I didn't. So I'll fall on that sword. But I hope that we're not, again, my impression of a couple of words that were chosen, one being underneath education equity, and the very first one saying ensure equally high outcomes. And I struggle with figuring out how we can determine that we can indeed ensure. Now, that's different than the IN sure, but EN sure is still pretty specific of saying that we are, kind of Google the definition, making certain that something shall occur. And I find it difficult to know that how we as a district can, in fact, make certain that something that occurs when outcomes are going to be determined by the participants. Now, do we want to hit that 100% insurance? Certainly. But an outcome is difficult to form, I think, equally high outcomes. So that makes me a little nervous and backpedal a bit. Again, I'm hitting some specifics here, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. Later on, underneath the equity by providing the LSR7 community that opportunities that ensure personal growth. Again, I think opportunities need to be presented, but I don't know how we specifically know that going into this we are going to make sure that or ensure that someone is going to personally grow. Lord knows that's going to happen. That will be an outcome. But again, by defining that certainty, what does that do if 5 years from now I'm a parent and I say, you know what, LSR7 ensured that my daughter was going to personally grow. I'm at odds with that. So I just have some caution in some of that. And to go farther down, a couple of other real quick comments was, ensure equitable educational experiences. Again, are we defining ourselves in a very box that other words might be chosen than to say that we are in fact, making certain that something shall occur or make certain of obtaining or providing something? They're just hard. And I realize this has gone through a number of conversations and folks want 100% delivery, as we all do. I'm just not sure that we can always get there with each individual, so.
So I appreciate this question, and I appreciate it because the team that wrote the policy and then revised it spent hours over words.
Sure. Oh, yeah. We always do. I've been on
hours
them.
over words. And because what we know about words is, right, they matter, right? And so ensure, committed, we toiled over those words. When we look in policy AC, it uses the term committed. I think it says in the first sentence, the Lee Summit R7 School District Board of Education is committed to maintaining a workplace and educational environment that is free from discrimination and harassment, and it goes on. This team that wrote it, though, decided, and in the feedback that we received from the staff and the community, it was solidified that it's not enough to be committed. Right? I think we are all committed to a list of things, right? That we have to move past commitment and we have to move to ensure that it happens. That ensures the action, right? And so I agree that it is a word that holds us all to a very high standard, right? And our obligation is to try to meet that standard for every kid at all times. And so I appreciate your thoughtfulness around the word, and I hope you know that the team really toiled with that word and landed on the side of using that word because it needs action. And we are absolutely committed to ensuring that all kids get that, not just presented to them, but put the action to make sure that not only are they presented with it, but they grab a hold of the opportunity and they're able to run as far, as wide as they can.
I appreciate that. I would tell you that ensure takes it beyond commitment, beyond, what was the other term you used? A second term in there? You said we want to make certain, or not even that?
Ensure.
Nope. What was the other word you said?
I don't know.
Sorry, I should have written it down, but I was listening. I'm just, again, ensuring outcomes is pretty much
a high bar.
difficult. It is a high bar, but that is a bar that we are by inserting that word, we are in essence guaranteeing that high outcomes will be met for all participants. Mm. And legally and liability wise, that makes me think, man, we're opening ourselves up for a lot of opinion and misunderstanding of exactly what high outcomes are going to be, because my definition of high outcome is going to be different than any others in this district. Henceforth, what might I do if my child does not have a high outcome? Walk away and say, thanks for the effort? Or do we repeat a year? Or do I get on the phone with my local attorney and say, I think there's a problem?
So the hope would be that it creates a space for families and schools to collaborate, right? This idea that it takes a village, right? That we are in a society sometimes that runs straight to lawyers, and I'll be honest, I don't know that we have much control over that at this point, right? But we absolutely have control over how we create opportunities to collaborate with families and students and staff to ensure that every kid has exactly what they need to be successful. I would ask though, do you have any suggestions on other terms that you would like to go there, and then we can.
One of the things you just said, we ensure the opportunity for every child to be successful. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not the same as ensuring equally high outcomes. I mean, that equal, and again, we're getting into, wordsmithing and the whole 9 yards. I realize you guys did already do this. Mm-hmm. But when words do mean something, Words will mean something, and this word, I believe, will mean something. It's like, I
you
am
have another
guaranteeing,
word you
I
would
am
like to
guaranteeing
suggest?
equally high outcomes for all participants. That is like a financial planner, hence, I am guaranteeing you high income, high outcomes for all participants and my clients. My compliance officer would say, you're locking the door behind you and we're going to lock down everything in your office because you cannot do that. You cannot ensure outcomes. I cannot ensure outcomes in the market. I mean, we can do everything we can to support kids and make sure every opportunity is clear to get there, and we better damn well do that because that's what that is all about. And that's what we've been wrangling with over the past however many years. But ensuring an outcome is different than ensuring opportunities. And I think we've talked about that issue any number of times, because later on in here, I love this sentence down here further that says, Brighton deserves equitable education. Purpose of the board is ensuring educational equity in order to maximize each student's full academic and social potential. Outstanding. Equity involves the intentional allocation of resources, as we have set up here, using our lens to make sure that everything is examined and reviewed for each person, regardless of, and all of those identities, most of those, all of them are here. The outcome piece is what has me a little bit going, ensuring personal growth? Possibly. But that may not be the case. I mean, it's, but whatever, encouraging, committed, I mean, whatever word, but man, ensuring is literally saying everybody has that high outcome. And my kid doesn't have a high outcome. Who do I point the finger to? Because in your policy, you're telling me you're ensuring high outcomes.
We would love feedback on words you think would fit in that
Sure.
space and stay.
I'm offering it up, so I
And then
better
we
do
can-
it. Yeah.
We can take those into consideration into the team. But I think the essence of the policy is that absolutely we ensure that.
I do not have a problem with the intention or the essence. I think it's nobility at its highest. I also saw us in here for hours deliberating over what was indeed understood to be policy and what was actually in practice. So I do not want to see us in here 5, 10 years from now going, hey, policy says this, practice is actually that. Let's spend another 5 to 3 a.m. issue over something that we may or may not want to face again. It's all I'm saying. I love the idea behind this whole piece. It totally makes sense. It should have been in here years ago. There's no doubt about it. Boxing us in and saying X, Y, Z because is really going to be, I just think, different. Too much interpretation of what high outcomes are, person to person to person, ensuring that. That's all. Thanks, Shelley.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, President Murdoch.
Board Member Campbell?
I was just gonna balance my wondering, because it almost feels like equally is the. Mike, I just wanted to have a kind of a conversation because it almost feels like equally might be another word as well. Like when I look at board priorities, where we say increase the achievement of every child, is that saying the same thing as ensuring equally high outcomes? I'm not sure. It's saying something a little bit different, and I think that's what, both are excellent statements, but they are very different. So that's kind of what I'm just trying to understand more what you're saying, and is that a different way to say it?
It may be. I mean, I'm just the absolute. The absolute idea that we can ensure an outcome, person to person to person, is to me almost impossible. Is it ideal? Yes.
But we do make that commitment.
That I understand. Yes, we prepare a student for success in life. I mean, maybe that's the idea. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
You know. Now, does that happen? It's every single piece. You know, I'm not quite so sure. I hope so.
I hear you.
But that's also different student to student, what that means.
Yeah.
What that means.
It is, you're right.
So that's
Yeah.
where I go back to, that's where I go back to individual student needs.
Yep. Good, thank you, thank you.
I appreciate it.
Board Member Sparks?
I'm going to start by saying that I appreciate the work that has been done. I also appreciate the fact that the committee decided to no longer apply words that does not create actions behind it. While I value and appreciate the perspective of Board Member Allen, I really appreciate what's before me. I believe there are some things that I can communicate with the team and you on some different adjustments, but overall, I think it's a much better policy than what was presented to us as a first draft. The question that I do have is I just find it interesting, and so I'm curious to know, was there some feedback from the other teachers or staff persons that decided or declined the invitation to participate in this work? I know that it shows that 50 people were invited and only 28 decided to participate. Was there some feedback?
So in previous years, there have been several district equity groups. I think what I could tally, there were 3 active, or some lists were active, some lists were inactive. And so what we did was combine all 3 of those lists. I had a teacher send me an email. He said, "We're ready, we're here, put us in." And I said, "Who's we? Tell me who." So we invited that list. There were 2 more lists that my administrative assistant had from prior years. We put all those 3 lists together and we sent out invitations to everybody. And then whoever came. And so that is something we'll be working on, is because there are so many lists that are out there of people that are staff members that have been active participants in this work, sort of restructuring a group, but also inviting in new staff members. So it was really just looking at groups that were established and then bringing them in. And so we had 28 out of 50 people, which is a little over half, and we got a lot of good work done and getting some feedback.
Thank you. And I know you also mentioned that Dr. Buck has a student council, like advisory committee. How often are we meeting with these students? And then what does that look like when it does pertain to policies that would affect students and them getting their input? What does that look like?
I just created it. We had our first meeting the day I had my surgery, so I didn't actually get to go to the first meeting. Shelley and Christy and several folks took it for me, but we're going to meet 5, 6, 7 times during the year. It's at each one of the high schools, and so we're building the plan as we go, but trying to get more student voice and things. And so one of the upcoming meetings, once this board policies passes, is talking about, all right, what's this look like operationalized in your eyes, and what feedback do you have for us as we talk about operationalizing a board policy?
How were the students selected? What was that process? How was it expressed to the other buildings of saying that this is what we're looking for? And then how was those students vetted of who actually was chosen to be part of the process?
I didn't want to get in the politics of selecting, so what we did is we went with their officers. So every grade level has officers, and then we went with the student council, president, vice president as well. So they already had elected officers to represent each one of the grade levels at the high school, and so we went with an existing group that peers have already selected. That way it wasn't in a, oh, you chose me over that person kind of situation.
I just want to make sure that we're correct. What you're saying is the officers in the buildings, meaning from student body, those were the ones that were selected to participate?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Marshall.
Thank you, President Murdoch. Good evening, Ms. Shelley.
Good evening.
Well, I agree with Board Member Campbell. This has come a long way from the first draft that we've seen. Reviewing this again over the past probably 24 to 48 hours. And I do agree, words matter, how we define them matter, because it's how it's perceived. And with that, I think that when we look at policies, especially educational equity, and how we've already discussed at our retreats, how this bleeds into every other area of the district. I believe we need to set the bar high. We need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, and therefore that has a trickle-down effect to those that we come in contact with. Looking over this policy over the past, like I said, 24 to 48 hours, yes, there are some wording things and shifts and formats and things like that that all kind of come out in the wash, as we say, we put these policies together on the policy committee. So when I look at policies and creating, directives and orders and things that govern something, right? I think of them in kind of a 5-part structure, right? We have our situation, which is why are we even doing this? Why is it important? What's going on? That's prompting us to do this, right? And then we have another section, which is our mission. What are we trying to get at? What's our objective? What do we want to obtain by creating this policy? And then the execution part of it. How are we going to do this? These actionable items, whether we're ensuring something, preparing something, however we're going to do that, we need to make it very plain in that execution portion of this policy. And then we get into the admin and logistics of it, right? Who's doing what? What are the moving parts of it, and how, this is when your timelines come out and all of this, your backwards planning comes into play. And then the last part of it is the accountability piece, the communication, the control part of it. Who's doing what? When are they expected to do it? Whose feet am I holding to the fire if this is not done? And I take that approach when reviewing all policies that I look at, just how it's structured. If you have that basic, those bones there, so to speak, then we can start to put meat on them, right? And so when looking at this policy, I kept coming back to that. Why is this even important? What brought us to creating an equity policy to begin with? What brings us to creating any other policy we have, whether it's in the finance section or whatever? What is the why? Where's the buy-in? And that I didn't see, right off of, initially. The definitions are great, but again, that's that restructuring thing of how it flows. So I would like to see a policy that's structured in that way, so you know why we're here and where we're taking you to and who you can hold accountable, students, parents, Dr. Buck, who he can hold accountable when things aren't, when they don't meet that standard. And the references that were cited here, I think what I would like to see is us to cast a wider net. We have mostly the local public schools that we glean from and how they're crafting theirs. But I think if we broaden our scope, right? There was executive orders put out within the past 2 days that clearly defines why we are where we are and where we need to go from here. And then there's also other public schools across the nation, East Coast, West Coast, wherever, that have great policies that reading their policy, that school board, that Board of Education is serious about educational equity. And there will be no missteps. And if you do, this is what you're held accountable to. And I think if we look at all of our policies this way, and we define it clearly where we stand, those stand the test of time. So we'll never be in a situation where someone is arguing policy against practices, because that's already set in stone of how, in that execution piece, how we're going to get to where we're going to get. Now, I get it, things change, time changes, and we develop new things, but the bones of it is there, and that's not going to change. So as we, kind of take this back to the drawing board and refine it, those are the type of structures that I would like to see us kind of build a house around it, so that our community knows and our teachers know, our staff members know why this is important and how we're going to implement it, and who's doing what. Everybody knows their part that they need to play in creating this, because, we all know why this policy even exists, because there are systematic things in place that were here long before anybody else was here that have allowed these type of inequities to continue over time. And I think making a policy without clearly defining that you're kind of just, you're not building on a strong foundation. So I think, like you mentioned in here too, also about systematically gathering and using data and feedback and things like that. And that's great. And at the same time, we need to systematically dismantle the system that has gotten us here and why we're doing this, so that we can create something that every child can pull from what they need and then be prepared for success in life. That's it.
I appreciate it. I do want to speak to the specifics, like who's going to do what. We
Yes.
did opt not to put that in there, but to rather link the CSIP and the equity plan to that, because those things are forever evolving. That's that timeline, who's going to do what, when they're going to do it, that day-to-day running of this. And so we did link that in there when we looked at the policies across. And I will say that we looked at several more policies than the ones that are listed in here. It's just in sorting through those, these are the ones that we really pulled from in drafting ours. But we had over 6 policies from various parts of the country that we looked at. But we really wanted it to be a space where we can link in where we are currently, and we're not revising this policy every year. And so instead, we just changed the link of it based on where we are in our CSIP, where we are in our equity plan, and so forth. So that was the intention of why we did not see any policies that had specific timelines of who was going to do what when. It was left very open so that districts could maneuver within it based on like specific data. If whatever data company we're using at the time, if a new test comes out, we have the flexibility to maneuver in that way and not be stuck to having to revise it every time we change the company that we're using for data. So it's things like that when we looked at policies, it was better to keep it very broad and to attach addendum documents to support that type of timeline work.
Board Member Fritchie?
Yes, thank you, President Murdoch. I just had one suggestion after hearing this exchange. I noticed in policy AC that they began with the actual policy and then listed the definitions. So I'm wondering if we flip-flop those.
Want to flip it?
I just wondered if that would follow kind of the same format of policy AC, if you did that, although I do really appreciate those definitions. I was just wondering, we list on our agenda here that the groups and all of the folks responsible for weighing in, and I was just wondering, who do we give credit to or thanks to for doing the heavy lifting of writing and revising this work?
There's a whole group of them, and I would hate to list names because I
Okay.
know I'm going to forget somebody, because I've been here 3 months, and I will not forget anybody's name, but I will absolutely send those names to you all, and I'm sure they would love an email or thank you note from you all for their hard work. They did this off contract on their own time, and compensation is one thing, but the sacrifice they made on behalf of all of LSR7 was beyond what we could pay them in money. So
Thank
they
you.
would
I appreciate you
that.
sending those to us. Thank you.
Oh, well.
Ms. Sanders, I just want to offer a couple of things here, and then Board Member Campbell, I'll get to you. Get back to you. The first is from a process standpoint, in terms of suggestions that would be coming to you. What do you and your team anticipate wanting in terms of getting this back before us? November, December, or are we wanting to get it right back in November?
I think the goal was to have it at first read as soon as possible so that
Okay.
we can stay in alignment with the equity plan, which I think was our initial goal.
Okay, and so in that same realm, once any updates and changes might be made, is it going to be then given back out to some of the community members for a final look?
So I did have a few of the community members who participated in giving feedback, wanting to know if they could see what the product would be before it rolled out to everyone. And so I told them that I would absolutely check with you all, but would like the opportunity to take it back to the team to do some quick work, run it through legal and MSBA, and then would love the opportunity, maybe after the first read, after we get another round of feedback from you all, to then open it up to the group that wrote the writing group, the community group, and even the staff group that gave feedback, so that they have the opportunity to view it before it goes to second read.
Okay, and that's kind of what I was hoping, that they would circle back to them, obviously, at some point here. And then my last comment here, real quick, in addition to definitions and whatnot, the policy itself, which I like, I feel like it's always going to be hard to define for somebody what a kid actually needs, right? And so in that vein, I did appreciate that in some instances here, we have to keep it somewhat 30,000 foot on a policy, because what I think my kid needs and what the school district thinks my kid might need may not always align. We want to collaborate to try to get to that point, but it may not always align. And so I do think that it's important that we stay high level here, and that then, like you mentioned, create the actions underneath everything else. So I just wanted to let you know I do appreciate you mentioning that as well.
Well, and this idea that who a kid is this year may not be who that kid is next year, right? And we always want flexibility to meet kids where they are whenever they get there, not based on our timelines and what's most convenient for the adults in the situation, right? So really just allow kids, students, to evolve and grow within our system, and we are going to meet them right where they are.
Appreciate that. Board Member Campbell?
I think I just wanted to note, so Board Member Marshall, I appreciate the way you kind of layered that in, because the why, that bold statement, I think that's what I'm looking for too. And Kim, I appreciate what you were saying. Maybe the definitions are critical, but maybe that bold statement needs to come first. And like when I look at, and thank you so much for referencing ACE and ACA, because when I look at those bold statements, you know, the Lee Summit R7 School District Board of Education is committed. The Lee Summit R7 School District does not discriminate on the basis of, you know, those are the bold statements, and that leading kind of the why. I think that's, you kind of hit on that. So thank you for highlighting that.
Can I follow up on that, please? We initially, that first draft, I think it started off that the Lee Summit Board of Education will, and the feedback we got from parents and staff was that that first sentence made it all about the Board of Education and not the students. And so that's why you see in this revision, that first sentence, which we can put at the top, but says each Lee Summit R7 school district student has the right to and deserves equitable education. So this idea that this is for kids, about kids, in the spirit of what's best for kids. And so that's why you did see that shift in there that came from direct feedback from two of our groups.
Appreciate that. Thanks for that follow-up. I think that bold statement, that's the why we're looking for. I think continuing to progress on that, I think that's important, but thank you.
I appreciate it.
And Board Member Sparks?
Just from discussion with everyone, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So the expectation is for this draft to go back to the individuals that have already been participating in this process, and then for Mrs. Sanders to then present back to us.
Correct. And then it'll have to go through the full policy read order as well.
Okay. And that is the same, that is the typical process for any policy,
Correct.
correct? Okay,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
Now, the addition to that was if anyone has input, they can contact and input. If they're not a part of the groups that were already a part of it, that was one thing that
And
was.
would that be just like through typical comments and emails like they normally would send?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Shelley, just to help you out, I assume you're going to have time to work with that group and then go through the process. You're going to come back here November 18th. When would you like that feedback by, so you have time to finish that whole
I actually
process?
just wrote this down for the board, unless you want a different date, is to go with November 5th. That
I would like it as soon as possible,
possible.
and as comprehensive as it can be. I will say that there's some differing perspectives on the views of the board, and so we would appreciate one direction because it's hard to write two ways. So if we could get,
But if you have patrons or students who want to send you comments,
they can do that through contact
what
us.
date would you like to have it? Let's get that out there.
The 5th, the
November
same day
5th.
as the
Okay.
board. Yes,
There you go. Thank you.
I I appreciate it.
And just for board members, like we've done with previous comments, just make sure we get them sent to Ms. Ismert so that she can compile them. It makes it easier as a one document thing coming from us. That way then, if there are general themes, they can be chosen and pulled into the policy, okay? So let's make sure that we do that. Other questions or comments related to this or for Ms. Sanders? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is exciting times for LSR7.
All right, that will conclude our work session. I think if board members are okay with this, we'll go ahead and adopt the closed session agenda, move into closed session, and then leave this room if that's okay with everybody. So, so at this particular point in your guys' agenda, I'm just over on the open to go into closed session. So we need a motion to adopt that agenda, please.
I move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion on that? All those in favor, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And now we need 2.01, the motion to go into closed session, please.
I move to conduct a closed session, including any record or vote, at 5:51 PM on Thursday, October 21st, 2021, at 301 Northeast Tudor Road, Lee Summit, Missouri, 64086, for consideration of the following matters in Section 610.021 of the Revised Statutes of Missouri: legal issues subsection 1, real estate subsection 2, personnel issues subsection 3 and 13, and student issues subsection 6 and 14.
Motion and a second to move into closed session. Any discussion? Ms. Ismer, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Board Member Campbell. Aye. Board Member Hedrick. Board Member Allen.
Aye.
Vice President Marshall.
Aye.
Board Member Fritchie.
Aye.
Board Member Sparks.
Aye.
President Murdoch.
Aye. Motion carries unanimously. We are in closed session, and we'll be back for the regular meeting at 7 PM. Thank you.